So welcome to the Greeks Crash Course. My name is Jim Schultz. I'm going to be leading you through this series, through this 10-episode series, where what we want to do is we want to look at the Greeks that we as use most of the time, that we as use to put our positions and our portfolios in the best possible spot. Now, of course, this is going to include the first order Greeks that we're all pretty familiar with, but we're also going to dabble into some of the second or third order Greeks that we find to be very, very important. Now, in each episode, we're going to follow the same sequence. We're going to cover 4 different things. First, what is the Greek? Second, how do we primarily use that Greek? And then third, how do we improve our returns with that Greek? And then fourth, how do we decrease our risk with that Greek? So without further ado, let's dive into episode number 1, Delta. Okay, so starting off, what is delta? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to attack this thing from 2 different angles. We're going to talk about the mathematical angle, the mathematical side of things, and we're also going to talk about the intuitive side of things. So let's start with the mathematical explanation. Well, delta is very simply how an option price will move given a $1 move in the underlying stock price. Now, as options rarely move 1 for 1 with a stock, what a delta does is it allows us to approximate how the option price will change given the stock price change. So for example, if an option has a delta of 30, that means that the option price is expected to move by 30 cents for every $1 move in the stock. If a delta is 50, then the option price is going to move, 50 cents for every $1 move in the stock. So mathematically, it really is that simple. If you want to reach a bit further down the learning curve and take a look at some deeper level mathematics related to delta, you can look at the Black-Scholes option pricing model, because delta is the first derivative of the Black-Scholes option pricing model with respect to price change. So it quite literally shows how is an option price going to change when the underlying stock price changes. Okay, but what about the intuitive side of things? Well, given these quantitative foundations, the intuitive side of things is actually quite easy. It just gives us some sense of how are my options, how are my positions in my options portfolio going to move around as stock prices move around. We usually keep it that simple and that clear and that fundamental at where things get pretty interesting. This is actually not how we primarily use delta. We actually use delta in a couple of other ways, which brings me to my next point. So how do we primarily use delta? In addition to that textbook definition, there are 2 other interpretations of delta. Number 1, delta can be used as an approximate probability gauge, and number 2, delta can also be used as a share equivalent to measure your directional bias or your directional exposure. Now, interestingly, we actually probably use delta's textbook definition, kind of the standard, default setting of delta. We probably use that guy the least. Instead, we use delta as a probability gauge and delta as a directional bias measurement at different points in time. On trade entry, when we're putting on a brand new position, that's when we lean on the probability aspect of delta. When we make adjustments to that position, that's when we might use both the probability gauge and the directional bias that delta provides us. But at the portfolio level, like when we look bird's eye view, 10,000 foot gaze, that's usually when we lean on delta's ability to give us a measurement of directional bias exclusively. So for example, let's say that I was considering a short put strategy. A quick shout out to my second crash course where we talked about strategy management and we went over short put, so make sure you guys give that a look. But let's say I'm considering a short put strategy that has a delta of 30. I know that the approximate probability from that delta is 30% that that option will expire in the money. Now, I'm a premium seller. I don't want the option to expire in the money. I want the option to expire out of the money, so I have the inverse of that, or a 70% approximately probability of success. This is very, very useful for me at trade entry. Now, let's say I have a position on and the delta is 40. Well, understanding the directional bias, understanding the share equivalent helps me process the fact that this position is going to feel like owning 40 shares of stock, even though the contract is for 100 shares. Conversely, let's say that the delta was 80. Now I know this is going to feel like 80 shares of stock on a 100 share contract. So it's going to feel a whole lot more like the full contract size and the full contract weight. I can gather all of this from the delta alone. Now, lastly, let's look at this from an overall portfolio standpoint. Let's say that my portfolio deltas were 200 and those deltas were beta weighted to the SPY. That's going to tell me, that's going to communicate to me that I effectively have what's going to feel like 200 shares of SPY in my overall portfolio. So that gives me kind of a broad market view of the directional exposure that I have with all of my positions in the aggregate. Understanding delta in these different ways, man, this can really help me make the right decision at the right time. Okay, so let's take a look at the return side of things. In the world of options, somebody once said, for every gimme, there's a gotcha. And Delta's relationship with returns, man, this might represent the most classic gimme gotcha exchange that exists in the marketplace. Now, of course, what we're going to cover for the next 30 seconds, 60 seconds, this is not the only way to generate returns as a premium seller. This is not the only way to generate returns from using options. But when we look at Delta's relationship with returns and credits and premiums, this is going to get us off to a good start. Ceteris paribus, all other things being equal, if you want to generate more returns from Delta, one way that you could do that would be to sell bigger Delta options. So you would choose 45 over 35. You would choose 40 over 30. The reason why this will generate higher returns is those 45 Delta options, they're going to have higher premiums than the 35 Delta options. Those 40 Delta options, they're going to have higher premiums than the 30 Delta options. Now, this relationship holds true regardless of whether you're on the call side or the put side. And to push this idea even a little bit further, the reason why this is the case, the reason why we see this relationship is, don't forget, deltas represent probabilities. Deltas represent the probability of expiring in the money. So if I sell a 45 delta option, then I only have a pop of 55%. Whereas if I sell a 35 delta option, I'm going to have a pop of 65%. So if I sell that bigger delta, yes, I'm going to bring in higher credits, more profit potential, the gimme. But I'm also going to have to absorb a lower probability of profit, the gotcha. Okay, so lastly, let's take a look at the risk side of things. Let's start by stating the obvious. The stock market is random. The stock market is unpredictable. Nobody knows where prices are going. Nobody knows which way the market wants to move in a given day or week or month or quarter or year. Understanding this, as option traders, as option sellers, it yields a number of advantages to us, two of which don't have anything to do with delta, two of which don't have anything to do with direction. They are theta and they are vega, and we'll take a look at those in those episodes. But getting back to the delta side of things, getting back to delta's focus on reducing our risk, here is the most important thing that you need to pull away. Control your size. Whether it's at the individual position level, whether it's the overall portfolio level, the best thing that you can do to control your risk as it relates to delta is to make sure that you are small enough, make sure that your delta is manageable, and make sure that you understand what directional exposure you are exposed to, which, having gone through, the last 5 or 7 or 9 minutes, you are starting to become equipped to do just that. Yes, of course, we all want to have a bias. We all want to play a hunch. We all want to be long or we want to be short, the overall market or a given stock for a certain time period. That's perfectly fine. But you need to understand the market is random. The market is unpredictable. It might not do what you want it to do. So how do you control your risk in a world like that? You do it by staying small. How do you stay small? You stay small by understanding delta in all the reasons that we've talked about today. So thank you guys very much for tuning in today. I am so humbled and I am so appreciative of your time and your attention. If you want to share this with one of your trader buddies, that would be absolutely amazing. Also, please consider saving this episode for future reference when you're trying to, better understand directional bias, probabilities, etc., etc. And when you guys are ready, I will see you in the next episode inside of this Greeks Crash Course, Theta. We'll see you guys there.